Starfield is not the game that it should be. Looking at the Metacritic scores, we can see that it's rated by the users 6.9 and only 61% of Steam reviews are positive, meaning that it has a mixed rating. It's clear that something isn't quite right with the game. Usually, games made with the Bethesda formula are loved and cherished by their fans. This is games such as Skyrim. But for some, Starfield just doesn't hit the mark. You've probably seen that there's thousands of video essays out there on YouTube detailing every little thing which is wrong with the game, but that's not what I want to do today. I don't want to be pointing out issues which thousands of people already have. Today, I want to discuss what could be done to mitigate some of the game's issues and make it into a better game. These fixes which I'll be suggesting will be feasible. I won't be telling Todd to remake the whole game and make it with only like 10 planets like he should have in the beginning, because that's just not feasible. It's not going to happen. I want something feasible, something that Bethesda actually could do. The reason that it's important for Starfield to be quote unquote fixed is that Starfield is the first game within this IP. When Starfield 2 comes out, if it comes out, probably in 12 years or so, if people remember that Starfield 1 was shit, there will probably be a lukewarm response to the game at best, and that would impact sales. One bad game is all that it takes to sink a game studio, even a game studio as big as Bethesda. You think Xbox is going to keep it alive just because it has the big Bethesda game? No. If Bethesda was a money loser for a long enough period of time, Xbox would liquidate it and give the IPs to someone else. Let's examine what went on with Cyberpunk 2077. On release, that game was a goddamn mess. Really a goddamn mess, not ready for release at all. CD Projekt Red really turned it around, and the fans love them for it. People are saying that Cyberpunk 2077 with version 2.0 is perhaps one of the best games ever. Really, Starfield could do with a similar transformation to that. Starfield's probably going to get about 2 years of support, and for that reason I'm going to aim for all my changes to be able to be done within a 2-year period. In about 2 years, I reckon that Bethesda's probably going to go into crunch time for Elder Scrolls 6, and it's going to be all hands on deck for that project to get it out the door. Just a note that this is my way of fixing Starfield, this is what I'm proposing, and if you do anything differently or you have ideas which go against my ideas and you think yours are better, please just leave it in the comments section below. I'll probably read it, maybe not. So in order to propose these changes which I'm about to propose, I actually need to tell you what areas I intend to address first and in what order. So there's about 6 areas that I want to touch on, maybe 7, but I'm just going to keep it as 6. So point number 1 of these 6 would be that the dungeons are not fun. They're all copied and pasted, and they're so boring when you've done them 100 times over. Number 2, probably something that we can't really work on much, but there is stuff we could do to make it a bit better, is there's no exploration to speak of at the moment. The planets in the game are completely boring, barren, rock-filled wastelands for the most part, and the odd planet that does have plants on it, it's just recoloured plants that you've seen on 100 other planets, so it gets boring. Number 3, the cities for the most part are lacklustre, empty and under-detailed for a game released in 2023. Number 4, the NPCs are lobotomites and the companions are so annoying and preachy. Number 5, the world building is just not where it should be for a game released in 2023. And finally, number 6, maybe even number 7, but I'm just chucking it in as number 6, is quality of life changes and missed changes which need to be made. One of the reasons that Skyrim is such a beloved game is that it's just so fun to wander around the game world aimlessly. Maybe you're wandering around the game world aimlessly, appreciating the outside environment, the trees, the rivers, the mountains, that sort of thing. Or maybe you're searching for a dungeon to go delving into and find something new and unique. So that brings us nicely onto what I want to tackle in this section of the game. First off, which is the bloody copied and pasted dungeons. We all know how bad these dungeons are and how boring they are when you've done the same dungeon 10 or 20 times over. The obvious solution to this would be to make all of the dungeons unique, but what I would say to that is hand making unique dungeons for 1,000 planets would be an insane task and would probably take Bethesda 1,000 years. Maybe, probably not, that's a bit of a hyperbole, but it would certainly take them a bloody long time. So what I would suggest instead is that Bethesda is a bit more tactical on handmade dungeons, and perhaps they would put maybe 1 or 2 handmade dungeon in each star system which is not related to a faction quest or to the main quest. This new abundance of handmade dungeons would really break up the shit which you find in the randomly generated dungeons and the absolute monotony that they bring the players. Perhaps in more frequently travelled star systems, such as in the Sol and the Alpha Centauri systems, they could be maybe 2, 3, or even if they want to get really spicy, 4 unique dungeons in that solar system or star system, whatever you want to call it. These dungeons should have a treasure room which has loot which is unique in it, not just the same randomly generated crap that you can find anywhere else. And if Bethesda really wanted to link all of these dungeons with a quest, perhaps they could make it that every single one of these dungeons has a token in it, and you need to gather like 100 or 200, how many ever dungeons worth of tokens in order to open a vault. And maybe in this vault there's some Starborn gear, so this is the way that people that don't want to go to New Game Plus can get Starborn gear. Thinking about the timeline of this, we know that Oblivion's dungeons, over 100 dungeons, were designed and implemented on an extremely short timeline, with one source saying that a single designer made 20 dungeons in just 2 weeks. Now there's 10 working days in 2 weeks, so that is 2 dungeons per day finished. Obviously the dungeons in Starfield are much more complex, with more things going on and more effects and development stuff to kind of worry about and implement. So I would say that a team of 9 or 10 people, highly motivated people, could probably develop these 100 or so or 200 dungeons in about a year to 18 months. And I'm talking about developed, tested and out the door with that. To augment the handmade dungeons, we could add a system that randomly generates dungeons. Bethesda makes dungeons levels by using what's called prefabs. Basically, prefabs are like little pieces of the dungeon which all slot together to make the levels. They are like the floor, the wall and the ceiling. If they dedicated some time and resources, they could probably make a system which could pump out different dungeons which are unique to each other. Even if they were similar to other dungeons which were randomly generated, this would be far superior to the same copied and pasted fucking dungeons being absolutely everywhere, and I am sure that almost everyone is on board with me when I say that. Whether or not Bethesda deems it worthwhile to dedicate the resources in order to make these randomly generated dungeons and handmade dungeons all over the galaxy is a question I can't actually answer. But with the current dungeons in the game, Bethesda run the risk that many players just see the same dungeon, they get bored, they start to feel like it's not worth going through dungeons, and then they turn off the game, install the game, and crucially never buy the DLC. And that's where it hurts them, in the bloody wallet. To get these randomly generated dungeons working, I think it would probably take around the same time for another team of 9 or 10 people. so it would probably take the same time as the handmade dungeons, maybe 12 to 18 months, and that is to implement it, test it and tweak it so it's making nice dungeons of a high quality. I expect that the system would probably be able to be developed in just a short number of months, maybe 4 months, but the vast majority of time with this would be testing it, bug fixing it and tweaking it so that it gives an output of a dungeon which is, as I said, coherent and convincing. Moving on to general exploration, I think this would actually be quite hard to fix without someone going around and manually making things and terrain on the planets. So obviously with so many planets that's probably impossible, and Bethesda have actually shot themselves in the foot with over 1,000 planets, I think. Essentially what we're going to have to do here is put a band-aid on a bullet wound. I would suggest that one thing Bethesda can actually do is to amp up the world generation, and by that I mean make the hills taller, make them into actual mountains, make valleys and craters deeper and bigger. The more extreme landscapes will be more interesting than just the flat rock fields that we see in the game right now. I mean, whole planets are bloody just flat rock fields. I know that's accurate and that most planets in space are probably fucking flat rock fields, but Bethesda need to strike the right balance between fantasy and realism with these planets in order to make a more engaging game. On to the animals. I was watching a video the other day and someone pointed out that none of the animals are mammals. Earth can't be the only planet to have developed mammals, surely. I would suggest to Bethesda to add some mammalian animals to these worlds. Nothing's really going to fix the randomly generated worlds to the point where they become as interesting as Skyrim's world. No one expects that, and if there's a mod for it, that guy could probably charge like £30 for it and people will pay it. On a positive note, Bethesda have said that they are going to include ground vehicles in the game in the very near future, which is a good positive because it cuts down the time you're just running and jumping about, but it does kind of reflect badly on Bethesda because it is them kind of saying, yeah, we know, we see how boring traversing a planet is, here's the fix, which is to make you play the game in this aspect of running around the planet less. I'm now going to break down this section of the video and go over it city by city. I'll cover most of the major cities, the ones that I found were probably needing the most work, to be honest. A common theme in Bethesda games is that the towns and cities are actually extremely small. I mean, just look at the concept art of Whiterun in Skyrim versus what they actually implemented. The maps of the cities are a good feature which has just been implemented in the game. It should have been there from the beginning, but it kind of just serves to show how small and empty the cities and settlements actually are in the game. Really, the cities do feel tiny, and one big theme of me in this section of the video is me going to be saying, yeah, make more of this settlement, make it bigger, but let's get on to it. Let's cross that bridge when we come to it. Example is, New Atlantis is apparently the biggest city that Todd Howard's ever made, yet it feels empty, devoid of life. If you look at games like Witcher 3 and Cyberpunk, the cities in those two games feel huge and alive. They're bustling, full of people who are doing things, not just NPCs hanging around staring at a fucking wall. There shouldn't be big empty open spaces in cities. Things happen in the parks and squares of cities. There are buskers, markets and other events. Each of the cities I'm going to talk about have their own unique problems, so I'll break this down city by city, as I think I already said that actually. And I would recommend that, on the whole, Bethesda make more things for the NPCs to do when they're walking around the cities instead of just sitting there and staring at me like they're trying to make me catch fire. New Atlantis looks amazing when you first see it for about 10 minutes. but after looking around you realise that it's actually as exciting as a piece of stale bread. This city seriously needs more life and less open space. Even though it's the biggest city in the game, and apparently the biggest city that Todd Howard has ever worked on, it really doesn't feel like it. I understand that they wanted to add a park to the city, but the space that it takes up is just far too much when compared to the rest of the city and the overall size of the city. They could solve this easily by adding a large building which serves as a botanical garden or a hydroponic farm to the park, and reclaim some of the area which is wasted and basically empty, and filling it with either more residential buildings or a market in addition to this would be a good addition too. Seriously, the city is too spaced out and empty. Unless I'm taking the train somewhere, it feels like I'm running and jet boosting for fucking ages before I arrive at the next place I'm going. In addition to being too spaced out, when you do actually enter one of the ginormous buildings that litter the cityscape, you realise that it's actually just one prick in a fucking small room. Where have all the interiors gone? In Oblivion it seemed like every single building had complete set of interiors, but you know, I would be pissed off if I was playing a thief character. I see these massive buildings, dollar signs in my eyes, and I go in and I realise there's almost no one to rob blind. Where are my money? Where is the shit to steal? Bethesda really should add more rooms to these buildings to actually justify their footprint. Now, let's move on from talking about the capital of the space fascists onto talking about the capital of the space cowboys. Let's just overlook the stupid cowboy theme for now. Aila City is actually one of the more believable settlements in the game. I can't believe I said that, but it's true. The city space feels really well utilised, and on the surface it seems like there is actually enough activity going on so that it doesn't feel dead. Yeah, most of it's just people walking around and people sitting around, but the city's so condensed that you don't really spend much time in one space. It's quite dynamic, and you know, the illusion isn't lost on you. One thing that I would say is the gravity level on Aila Planet is far too high. They should lower the gravity level from what it is right now, which is 1.5, to something closer to 1. This is just because moving around the planet with 1.5 gravity is kind of annoying, and when I'm just wanting to go to my house, it just fucks me off a bit. Aila City is really tiny, so I would say that the major thing that needs to be done to this settlement is they need to expand outward, adding new districts to the city. Possibly a farming district. I know there are farms right now, but maybe make them a bit more dense and a bit more numerous, so it kind of explains to the player where, you know, where all the food supply for these supposed hundreds of people come from. And an industrial district would be great as well. You know, these space cowboys took on the UC in the colony war and actually almost won. The United Colonies is a faction which on the surface seems to be much more technologically advanced. On top of this, another residential area for my thief character to rob would not hurt at all. That would be great. I need my stuff. I need to rob your fucking blind. Moving on to Neon, the crime city. For improvements to Neon, I would ask Bethesda to play Cyberpunk 2077 and then remake the whole city from the ground up. Actually, that goes against what I said about scope. I said I wasn't going to do that. First, let's identify what makes Cyberpunk's Night Cities one of the best cities in any video game I've ever played. Going through the streets of Night City, you can really tell that it is such a dystopian nightmare, unlike Starfield, where numerous NPCs needed to tell me that Neon is a dangerous place, because it didn't really seem like a dangerous place. You know, it's not just the trash which covers everywhere that makes Night City into the dystopian setting that it is. There's derelict buildings, a sign that any prosperous period has passed in this place. There's gun battles taking place and gang wars happening all around the player without the player's intervention. which serves to punctuate the feeling that the city's a dangerous place. And the in-game media, by that I mean the adverts, TV shows and various signage around the city, illustrates to the player that this is a city which has long forgotten about morality. All of these things add together to create such a great setting. Even just remembering the city makes me want to replay 2077 again. Maybe this time I will actually go and meet Hanako at Embers. Neon is meant to be crime-ridden, but it feels safer than my home city. There should be garbage everywhere, not just in the back streets. Drug addicts and degenerates, random muggins. What about in Fallout New Vegas when you went to the bit before the actual New Vegas strip where you got mugged or people were trying to steal your shit and scam you or sell you drugs? Where's all that in Neon? And outside the main strip of Neon City, there definitely needs to be more in your face media and signs. Where are all the adverts for Aurora, the drug that's supposedly only legal in Neon and is a big draw for people to come to the city? There should be signs for that on the bloody landing pad, like, oh, come here to get your Aurora. The nightclubs and kind of like bars and stuff really need to be changed too. You know, there's one bar in kind of the back streets which, as General Sam put it, has the sickest hype track ever. But when you go in, it genuinely is just a cafe with loud music in it. You know, you really need to get the club vibe right, and that just ain't it. And in the main nightclub, which is at one end of the strip, you know, it's meant to be a strip club, but all of the dancers are wearing like a lycra jumpsuit. You know, this is a city that is meant to have long forgotten about morality, so I'm pretty sure the strippers won't mind if they're wearing a skimpy outfit instead of the goddamn lycra jumpsuit thing that they're wearing. I don't think they'll care much about modesty. People should be drinking, dancing, taking drugs or passed out in the main strip. You know, sounds of gunfire in the background and, you know, police running around. You know, give the general vibe. It's kind of like Magaluf in the middle of summer, really, except I don't think Magaluf has many gunshot sounds in it. But that's the general vibe, like a degenerate place that Neon should have captured properly and needs to capture properly in order to be a successful settlement. You possibly didn't expect me to cover Paradiso in this video, but Paradiso is kind of a location that makes me a bit mad, to be honest with you. Paradiso is meant to be a solar system or galaxy-wide renowned resort which people hold in high regard as a place of luxury. But if you go there, you'll see it's quite boring and there's only really one or two quests to do there. One of them is the one where there's people been travelling in space for 200 years and they arrive on the planet and you need to choose how to deal with them. And I think the other one is you're finding an item, and I don't think I've even done that quest. If you choose to marry Sarah, this is the location for the wedding. But I just can't help feeling that this place is completely and utterly dead. It seems that there's almost nothing here to do for the guests apart from eat in the usual restaurants, that's Chunks and some coffee shop, or just sit on the beach and drink. This place really needs more life. Anyone who's been at a holiday resort before knows that there's special events and lots of entertainment which goes on in said resorts. You know, Paradiso would be an absolute perfect place for a large casino or some sort of shopping mall, possibly a strip of bars with people partying in them, the back onto the beach itself. And going onto the beach actually isn't very nice at all. It's small, cramped and full of black boulders which look like if you touch them you're going to slit your leg open or something like that. Here's a picture of a nice beach, and here's another picture of a nice beach. You see how the pictured beaches have lovely white sand and no rocky outcrops in sight, plenty of space for the beachgoers to enjoy themselves. Yeah, well, the beach in Paradiso is not like that at all. I think this location needs to be redone with the in-game guys that maybe the private company that owns Paradiso has done some terraforming. So this picture that's on screen shows my vision for the resort. First off, we're going to make the beach much bigger and prettier by removing all of the black boulders which break it up, and add more areas for guests to relax in, more spaced out. The beach should be extended round to the right with the beach front bars, clubs, and maybe even a strip club, you know I like those, added in there. You could also add another hotel in here, perhaps one that is like higher class or lower class, you know, something different, that can give the player a bit of a different vibe to the area. Right, back on to where the original hotel is, on the right where there was the power station and a large rock hill, add a mall with all sorts of shops and restaurants, and a casino where the player can go and play either slots or cards. Moving to the left of the hotel, up the hill here, would be a great place to put a park and a pool which overlooks the lake. Access to the park and pool could be from a stairway or lift from the back of the original hotel, or from a stairway originating from the beach too. Casino and the shopping mall would be a great thing to attract the player to come here over and over again, and not just once for some quests. You know, this would make Paradiso such a better location, and it only took me 20 minutes to think it up. I took 20 minutes to think up a better and more exciting resort than Bethesda did in probably the months that they were planning this settlement. Modelling and placement for this could be done rather quickly, but I think with Bethesda's pace, I imagine implementing my vision for Paradiso would probably take a small team of level designers and 3D artists 5 or 6 months. A point that I've touched on already is that Bethesda needs to make the worlds seem more alive. One thing that I think they've missed a trick on is closing the shops at night. In Starfield, the shops are open 24/7. One of the things that made Skyrim and Oblivion's game worlds feel more alive was the fact that the world seemed to respond to the in-game time. You couldn't just arrive at a shop at 3 AM and expect to buy a new suit of armour. You'd need to wait. This would also force the player to wait around in the settlement and perhaps do other things. One of the places that gets busier at night in Skyrim is the inns and taverns. Choosing to visit the tavern at night to pass the time would mean the player could encounter other NPCs with stories and quests and lore, and it was really good way to get the player to engage with the world rather than just running through it wildly at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Maybe they would even find a companion to recruit or someone to fight. Forcing the player to stay in a location for more than a short period of time whilst they run to the shops madly forces them to appreciate the location a bit more, and in turn the location becomes more grounded to them as a real city with people in it, and not just a place for the player to sell stuff, buy stuff, steal stuff and then immediately leave. I appreciate that not all shops need to close. Perhaps obviously bars would stay open 24/7, and perhaps even the trade authority could stay open 24/7. They do seem like the kind of dystopian organisation to make their employees work 24/7. Closing the shops at night also creates an opportunity for people playing as a thief character. Here we are back again at the thief characters. So I can get my thief character, wait until night and heist a shop and steal everything that ain't nailed down. But I can't now, because the shops are open 24/7, so when I sneak in, I see that same motherfucker standing there looking at the wall. He's not moved in 6 years and he doesn't know his left from his right hand anymore. This change of closing the shops at night would probably be very, very simple to implement. All they need to do is set the door to lock on a timer, and I know they have code to do that already because they could port it over from Skyrim, Fallout 4 or whatever games they still have code for, and then move the NPC, which is normally standing behind the counter, somewhere else. Maybe they can just put them in the Ethereum and fire them out the game world altogether, or maybe they can make them go home or give them an assigned home to sleep in the bed for. You know, this change would probably take a couple days to a week to implement due to the amount of shops in game, but honestly it would be very simple. You know what, I'm going to change a couple days to a week to a month and a half, because we all know what Bethesda's like with updates. It's going to take a long time for them to do even the simplest of things. Moving on to something which is actually quite contentious, which is the travelling between the planets and all of the loading screens. Unfortunately, we need to come to the realisation that we will never have the ability to fly between planets or fly down to planets without loading screens. We will possibly have that ability in Starfield 2 when it comes out in 12 to 15 years. Even if there even is a Starfield 2, I suggest Bethesda change the loading screens when flying between the planets and star systems to be an animation of a spaceship flying through space rather than the stationary picture that it is right now. You could have an effect which obscures the skybox around the spaceship, so all you'd need to change from player to player is the model of the ship which is featured in the loading screen. Once the loading is ended, all you need to do is play a short animation of the ship slowing down into the orbit of the planet that they have travelled to. This is what the latest Lego Star Wars game does, and it's a lot better and a lot more satisfying than seeing the picture on the loading screen with the stupid hint that we've all seen a million times. Maybe they just don't want to give up the loading screen hints, and it is like necessary for them to make a game. It needs loading screen hints. I don't know, but doing this would really help the player kind of at least get over the loading screens when flying between planets. NPCs who populate the settlements and cities are lobotomites. They act in a really unbelievable manner, and a lot of them just either seem to be wandering aimlessly or standing and sitting around doing nothing. Do none of these people have jobs? NPCs doing tasks which make the game world seem more believable do not need to be very in-depth. The player only needs to believe that they are going around a natural way of life for a few seconds whilst the player traverses past them. This effect is best seen in Novigrad, a city in Witcher 3. All of the people in the city seem to be going about their everyday, walking, doing everyday tasks. Obviously, if the player was to stop and watch one of these NPCs for more than a minute, the facade of believability would fall. But when the player is just traversing through the city, the facade only needs to be believable at a glance for a moment or two. Not many players will take the time to stop and watch an NPC like I did to kind of see if the facade would drop in Witcher 3. You know, it's kind of sad to say this because my 12-year-old mind was absolutely blown away by the fact that every single NPC in Oblivion lived their own life with a complete schedule. You know, they would get up, they would eat food for a certain period of time at a certain place, they would go out and do certain tasks for a certain time and different tasks on different days, and then they would go to the pub or they would go home, and you know, it was like they were living a real life. It's sad to say that this isn't needed anymore because that system, I think it was called the Radiant AI system, really blew me away. But it just, on the scale of Starfield and how many NPCs you have, it's kind of impossible to do that. I guess part of growing up for me is realising that the Radiant AI system, whilst very cool, is ultimately unnecessary. See, the problem with the Radiant AI system for Starfield is that there are just so many NPCs, and there's nameless NPCs as well. So what kind of schedule would you give these nameless NPCs? And also the thousands of NPCs which are named, modifying their schedules and making sure and testing all their schedules are correct is an insane amount of work. I believe that the best system would in fact be a blend where unnamed and unimportant characters, even unimportant characters which have name, would have a very thin facade where they do simple tasks which look believable to the player as they are passing by, and to the more important characters and quest characters such as members of Constellation or members of other factions have more in-depth schedules and do more in-depth tasks. This way, the NPCs which the player is more likely to examine closely have thicker facades to break. I know there's a mod for it, but I feel like Bethesda should do it just to give us the blessing, and so we don't need to download a mod. But seriously, they need to make the followers and companions way less judgmental, or they should just add an evil companion. Seriously, all of the companions are so annoying in this regard. Let me give you an example, and you've probably heard this example from another video, but the TLDR of it is you need to wipe out an alien species which is terrorizing the settled systems or settled colonies, whatever they call it. And there's two options. Option one is to pump a chemical into the atmosphere of all these planets, and that should take out all of the aliens. And option two is to bring back an extinct species of alien, and this alien will cull the terrorizing alien. It's told to us that in the long run, option 2, which is bringing back the alien to wipe out the terrorizing alien, will be just as effective as option 1. And so obviously I chose option 2 because I don't really feel comfortable pumping a chemical into the atmosphere of all these different settled planets, because even though they say it's settled science, I don't really believe there is such a thing as settled science. Science is an ever-changing thing. So I felt happy about my moral choice. I felt like I was on the moral high horse. And then I go back onto my ship and Sarah's angry at me. And I go up to talk to her and she Spanish Inquisitions me about how I've made the wrong choice. And she says that I should have made the other choice. And let me get one thing with you straight, Sarah. I'm talking directly to Sarah right now. Sarah, you have demonstrated that you are not good at making executive decisions. In the colony war, you got your whole crew killed because of your stupid decision making, and you didn't even go back to see if they survived for a fucking decade. Realise I'm the captain and leave the executive decisions to me. Honestly, I wouldn't really, and this is back to you, the dear listener now. Honestly, I wouldn't mind if they were just like, oh, I would have gone with the other choice because of XYZ. But they're whiny motherfuckers and they go on about it at length, literally, and I'm trying to get out this conversation with this stupid cunt and she just won't drop the fucking subject, man. If it's one or two sentences, it's fine. But it's just the fact that they go on at it at absolute massive length. Now we'll move on and talk about the quality of life and NIFS changes which Bethesda should make to the game. One thing that I'm sure most people have run into is that searching for specific planets or a star system on the star map is an absolute pain in the ass. I found it surprising that there's no search feature included in this screen at all. Not even a text box, which is literally the simplest version of a search. Even a simple page where the player could scroll through a list of systems or planets would be better than nothing at all. Ideally, Bethesda should have included a comprehensive search feature on the star map page in order to assist the player in finding what they are looking for. Imagine a tab on the left hand side of the star map which the player can expand. In this tab there would be 3 sub-tabs, one of which includes all of the star systems, showing details of what planets are in that system, and when the player hovers over a system name, another sub-tab is shown which lists all of the stars or planets which have major settlements in them, and lastly a sub-tab which shows the player a list of star systems in which the player has quest objectives in. This search feature tab could also have a search box where the player can either search for a star system, a planet, or a settlement name, and it will, when the player clicks on it, it will bring them to the view of that planet on the star map so they can quickly fast travel to it. I do realise that none of Bethesda's games have had search features tied to the map in the past, but none of Bethesda's other games had this number of locations in it. And this is a problem that really needs to be solved because it's so tedious searching around the star map for what you need, and I know all Starfield players have had the experience of looking for a specific star system or place without knowing where it is. I'm sure that all of you have come across Contraband in your time playing Starfield. One of the pieces of Contraband, Xeno Warfare Tech, has a listed value of 16,110 credits, but when you smuggle it into a settlement and take it to the Trade Authority to sell, which I believe is the only place that you can sell it that's not located in the key, you find out that the price that the Trade Authority will buy this Xenofair Warfare Tech thing for is actually only 1/8 of the price that they are listed for in the menu. 1/8 of the price. It's not just Xeno Warfare Tech though. All of the Contraband items fall for this flaw, for this insane decrease in value. The first time I saw this, I genuinely thought it was a bug until I looked it up online and found out that the price of Contraband is intended to be so goddamn low. This instantly makes Contraband not worth the hassle of smuggling it into a settlement. It's not even worth the hassle of taking it to the Trade Authority in the Wolf Star system, which doesn't require the player's ship to be scanned. I thought of actually two fixes for this issue. The first is that Bethesda should increase the price that Contraband sells for at the Trade Authority. The player will still not be able to make a ton of credits from this as usual. The Trade Authority only has around 11,000 credits in their vendor credit limit. I don't know how you would call that. But this would be incredibly easy to implement. It would just be the change of a config file. It would literally take 5 minutes for anyone. Bethesda, it would take a week. However, if Bethesda wanted to make it interesting, they could instead keep the amount that the Trade Authority will purchase the Contraband for at the same level, 1/8 of the price that's listed, and introduce a few NPCs around the star systems, which will approach the player and request certain pieces of Contraband. Maybe one of these NPCs will ask the player to get them 10 Xeno Warfare Tech, and they will pay 60% of the listed credit value. This means the player would receive 9,666 credits instead of the Trade Authority's 2,014 credits. For the Xeno Warfare Tech, that is. Other Contraband's price may vary. I think this is a fair price point, as the player would still need to get creative in order to smuggle these items to where the NPC is located, and it would be 5 times the amount of money that the Trade Authority would pay for it, meaning that the player is actually incentivized to do it. These NPCs could be triggered to give the quest to the player after either the player's been in jail, or if the player has already sold a few pieces of Contraband at the Trade Authority. I imagine that Bethesda would be able to implement a few of these NPCs around the star map very quickly, making the player find specific types of Contraband rather than having these people accept all Contraband would allow this to prevent players from farming these quests too easily. All in all, I reckon that with the right people at the helm and the help of a voice actor, Bethesda would be able to implement my second idea for fixing Contraband in just one of their 6-week sprints. If not, I'd imagine that the maximum amount of time this would take would be 12 weeks, which is 2 of the 6-week sprints that Bethesda has implemented for improving Starfield. A feature which we seem to have lost, which I greatly enjoyed, was the ability to loot everything off of a corpse. In all of the Bethesda games that I can remember, where you were able to loot absolutely everything off of almost every corpse. I will grant that there is some exceptions, such as the palace guards in Oblivion not dropping their white Imperial armour. But this was a rare exception. Clothes, weapons, ammo and other misc items, they were all there. But it seems like in Starfield that when you loot a dead body, the loot that is there is not based on what the NPC had before their untimely demise. It's all randomly generated, and that really fucking sucks. Because if you're fighting an enemy and you really like the weapon or armour that they're using, there's a chance that the NPC won't drop it. This random generation system which Bethesda has implemented in this game is really exploitable. If you quick save before you kill a legendary enemy, you can reload the quick save to reroll what legendary items the enemy drops when they die. This exploitation was not so readily available in other Bethesda games. Bethesda really needs to return to their old system where the loot on the bodies is what the NPC was using, including their armour, helmet, weapon and ammo if applicable. If Bethesda is concerned about giving players gear which is too good too early in the game, then they could add versions of the armour or weapons which have the tag corroded or broken stuck onto the front of the name of the item. Then they can lower the stats of the item so that they match the level of loot which the player is meant to be receiving. I imagine that Bethesda already has systems from previous titles which they would be able to port over to Starfield in order to bring this functionality. I estimate that this would probably take 4 or 5 months to properly port over and fully test. 1 or 2 months for actually porting the code over, and the rest of the time for testing and tweaking the system to get it correct. Although the character creation is quite good for the most part, one of the problems that I had is that all of the default eyes look weird. I've heard someone else describe the eyes with the term prey eyes, and I would have to agree. The eyes in the game are not the eyes of a traditionally evil looking person. I think the problem is that they are too wide and there's too much white in the eyes. The shape of them is much too round. I found these pictures on the internet which managed to illustrate the issue quite well. It wouldn't take 3D modelers long to create new eye presets which would allow the characters to not look like such a doe-eyed idiot or look like a villain for once. Why is Bethesda taking away the ability to play the villain, man? It pisses me off so much. One of my favourite creations for Skyrim is the survival mode. You know, normally I wouldn't have bought the survival mode, but Bethesda gave it to me for free, and I found it to be extremely fun. The requirement to eat, sleep, and having no fast travel really grounded me in the game world. Instead of rushing about in towns or fast travelling to every objective like you would in a normal playthrough, I was forced to live in the world. Now I finished that Skyrim playthrough after over 110 hours, and in that playthrough I did the main story, the DLC and a large chunk of the other side quests and faction quests in the game. I feel like a survival mode would be a great addition to Starfield. Obviously you can't really remove fast travel from Starfield, but you can add in the other systems. Requiring the player to eat and sleep would make the game a bit more challenging and would force the player to play a bit differently. They would probably need to visit settlements more often to either sleep if their spacecraft doesn't have a bed, and to top up on food if they're in systems where there perhaps isn't food readily available. They could also make the debuff system, and by that I mean the system where the player is affected by radiation, the temperature of the planet and any gases on the planet. That would mean that the armour that you wear in planets actually matters. In the game right now it doesn't really do anything. Todd Howard described it as flavour, which I do kind of get why he would do that, but in this survival mode where we're focusing on making the game a bit harder and play a bit slower, having the buffs actually matter really would be great. So it would mean maybe the player needs to stock up on different types of armour, or maybe they need different drugs to survive on different kinds of planets. You know, it just kind of opens the game up to the player needing to play a bit more tactically, and instead of running and gunning like you normally do, you would need to land on a planet and think, okay, this is an ice planet, so I'll wear this armour because it's got a good warmth buff, or this planet's got lots of radiation, so I need to wear this one because it's got good radiation protection. You know, it really would just add a little spice to the game. Obviously, I understand that survival mode's not for everyone, and some people honestly do just want the running and gunning experience to play for these games casually. You know, some people like me, you know, you come home from working a 9 to 5 and you think, fuck, I just want to play an easy game, shoot some motherfuckers and just have fun. You know, so that's why I think that survival mode should be an option in the menu, which can be turned on and off by the player, and it should be set as off by default. The movement of Starfield really is quite good when compared to other games such as Skyrim and Fallout 4. It feels a lot more fluid than those games, but the movement really can't compare to a game like Cyberpunk 2077. We've got the jetpacks and we've got the slide, but both kind of feel kind of shitty. The jetpacks don't seem to go up nearly high enough, or the jump packs don't seem to push you forward as much as they should, and the slide is really short. It's almost as if the player just takes a knee and gives himself some carpet burn. So what Bethesda should do is they should increase the length that the player should slide for, and they should increase the amount that the top tier jetpacks boost you up, or even perhaps just decrease the amount that a jetpack takes of your boost bar, so it consumes less boost stamina or whatever you'd like to call it. They should also add some mods to the boost pack too. So they should have the mod, a lot of games have this feature that when you boost up, when you're at the top of the boost, if you aim down sights, it like either slows down time or you can just hang there. So that could be two boost pack improvements. Maybe they could be locked behind a skill, where you can either choose between slowing down time when you look down your sights when you're boosted up, or it just freezes you in place and time runs as normal. Freezes you in place, like, so you hover in the air maybe for just 2 or 3 seconds, and that would make all the difference. The boost pack itself shouldn't be locked behind a skill at the beginning of the game. The boost ability is fairly important, and I feel like all players when they start the game should have access to it. So just take out the skill which you need to require the player to use the boost pack, have the player able to use the boost pack in the beginning of the game, and replace skill 4 with the ability to either hold in place or slow down time when using the boost pack. The player speed also needs to be improved quite a lot. I feel like sometimes the player can be quite sluggish, so maybe if there's some way for the player to do like a double sprint. You get that in some Call of Duty games where you have your initial sprint and then you have your double sprint where you have your weapon up in the air and you're really just going for it. Maybe they could do this, because going the long distances across planets really does require the player to go a lot faster than they're going right now. It's so tedious running across planets and boosting across planets that they really need to add something into the game to increase the mobility. And that's not just the vehicle that they're promising far off in the future. These movement things could be added now with relative little effort. I imagine that they could get this done in 2 sprints worth of time. Just a couple of config files changed for the player speed, and small tweaks in order to get the double sprint and to get the 2 boost abilities which I talked about there. In this section of the video I'm going to go over some miscellaneous items which I wanted to touch on. All the changes which I have proposed have been proposed, so there's going to be no more changes after this point, and if you're just here for the changes, switch the video off I guess, but I think I've got some good things to say here. One general critique of Bethesda in this game Starfield is that all the edges of the game world have been sanded down. such that even a 7-year-old child can play the game and not really see anything they don't see on television. You know, add the edges back in is what I would say. Make the game more grittier. I can't remember any time where I witnessed any NPC swear, really. And there's not enough chances in this game to be either morally grey or even evil. And any chance you do get are ruined by your Constellation companions lecturing you. Makes me want to put my fucking plasma pistol in my mouth and blow my fucking brains out. It's like they're trying to bore you to death, really, the companions. What I would say is that hopefully in this upcoming DLC Shattered Space, we're going to have the chance to maybe join an evil faction. You know, in Oblivion and Skyrim, you have, you know, the Thieves Guild, you've got the Dark Brotherhood, and it's a real chance to be part of an evil faction. But in Starfield, the only way to join an evil faction, which is the Crimson Raiders, is to be a fucking undercover agent. You know, I want to be a pirate on my own terms, and there should be an option in this game to join the Crimson Raiders or someone else, some other evil faction on your own volition, not just because you've been put there by some guy who wants to bring them down. And I know you can choose at the end to stay evil, but it kind of takes it out of it when you've been an undercover good boy agent for the whole quest line and all of a sudden have a change of heart at the end to keep the 250,000 credits that you get. Before I draw conclusions on things which we are changing to make the game better, I would first like to touch on what Bethesda cannot or will not change. The most obvious thing that Bethesda can't change is the story of Starfield. Scripting quests and writing main storylines take a hell of a lot of time, and it's a very iterative process with committees and all sorts of people involved reviewing and redoing parts of the story. So I imagine that Bethesda has spent a hell of a long time on the main storyline, and it's pretty much set in stone at this point. And another reason they won't change it is that the story of Starfield, this game, is probably tied in some way to Starfield 2, so changing the story now would probably require that Starfield 2 get a rewrite as well, and or some things get retconned for Starfield 2 to exist in the way it will in the future. You know, when they plan out these games, when they plan out Elder Scrolls games or Fallout games, Bethesda really do plan for the future. And, you know, they're probably developing Fallout 5 right now, but Todd Howard and other people at Bethesda probably have ideas in their head or even written down on what they want to happen in Fallout 6 and Fallout 7. It's pretty much the same across the whole industry. People really have a view for the future when they're making series of games. The abundance of loading screens in the game is not going anywhere. I believe that the necessity for this amount of loading screens is tied to the game engine and the fact that in its current state it cannot handle the processing of the necessary physics calculations, textures and data which would be required to eliminate these loading screens. This is also why we cannot fly between planets or fly down and land on a planet without the need for a loading screen. Moving on to quite a contentious issue, which is the game engine. I've heard some perhaps non-technical people say that if Bethesda just moved to Unreal Engine 5, everything would be good, but I fundamentally disagree with that point. I would bet money that Bethesda will never change from the Creation Engine to any other engine. It's certainly true that Starfield could have been made in the Unreal Engine. There's nothing special about the Creation Engine, or the Creation Engine 2 rather, that makes it so it's the only engine which Starfield can be made in. But I can think of at least 5 reasons that Bethesda are going to stick with the Creation Engine, and these are these reasons now. Number 1, all of their staff are trained on the Creation Engine. Number 2, all of their established workflows are based around the Creation Engine. Number 3, the engine support, if they move to Unreal, would be done by an external body rather than by Bethesda themselves. And I know personally, because I work in the tech industry unfortunately, that working with third-party companies can really complicate and delay projects massively. Number 4, Game developers quite often reuse code from their previous games to speed up development. Porting over code from the creation engine to the Unreal Engine would be difficult and time consuming. Perhaps it would even require a complete rewrite for some parts of the code, which would probably cost the studio a lot of time and a lot of money. And number 5, probably the most important reason, is money. The Unreal Engine costs $1,850 per user per year. 100 users over 4 years is $740,000. Given the fact that 100 users is quite a conservative estimate, given that Bethesda have 350 to 400 staff. So I imagine this, that figure for 4 years of licenses could even be $1.5 million. That's the cost before you've even paid your staff and gotten the game out of the door. Unreal Engine also takes a 5% cut of revenue above $1 million. I mean, 5% doesn't sound like a lot, especially to me. I'm British, I get taxed 20%, and the government fucks me every month. But going back onto the point, if Starfield sold 10 million copies for $70 each, that would be a gross of $700 million. But they would need to pay Unreal $34,950,000 for that. And that is a massive amount of money. I'm sure that the executives at Bethesda and Xbox would make the business decision to stay with the creation engine rather than spending more than $35.5 or even $36 million to use the Unreal Engine. And that figure of $35.5 to $36 million is without factoring in the costs of training and getting all their staff up to speed. Bethesda has become quite entrenched in their creation engine. If Bethesda did move to another game engine, I imagine it would add years onto the development time of the first game they made with the engine. Skyrim came out when I was 16 years old. I'm almost 30 now. I'm waiting for Elder Scrolls 6 to come out already. Please, please, please don't add any more years onto the development time than they need to, because I'm almost going to be middle age when Elder Scrolls 7 comes out. Fuck, I might even be dead of old age by that time. Back onto the topic. Few game studios would be willing to make the investment of time into moving to a new game engine. You can see the same business decisions not to change engine being made at various EA studios. The Frostbite engine is notoriously difficult to develop with, but EA was pushing it to its studios really, really hard so that they're all using the same engine, despite the insane problems which it caused. According to one developer, the Frostbite free engine was so complex and bad that when they released Dragon Age Inquisition, they still didn't fully have the engine working as intended. Businesses like Bethesda and EA will not give up their proprietary engine so easily. CD Projekt Red moving to the Unreal Engine is a rare exception. It is not the rule, and I absolutely applaud CD Projekt Red for moving away from the Red engine, because it was a bloody mess. With Bethesda now in the pocket of Xbox, I feel like a move away from the creation engine is now less likely than ever, because Xbox is watching over Bethesda's financials like a hawk, cutting and cutting and cutting. You can see that because Xbox recently laid off thousands of staff from the game studios. Now for the conclusion. If Bethesda took all things on board which I've mentioned in this video and made the changes as I recommend, then they would have a much more enjoyable experience. Many players would be attracted back to the game. Starfield would be a game which has interesting and alive settlements, reasons to go and visit all of the star systems, dungeons which are less boring, and many quality of life features which were needed, such as a way for the settlements, planets or star systems to be found on the star map without flying about the star map like an idiot. Even with all these changes, I still believe that many of the fans of Bethesda game series would still not enjoy Starfield. This is due to the fact that exploration really has had the arse ripped out of it in Starfield. It's a different experience, even Todd Howard admitted that, and in such a large universe, actions of the player can feel meaningless sometimes. I really do feel like the scope of the game world is a massive issue in this game which cannot be fixed. Adding 1000 planets really was a stupid mistake to make. I understand that once they got the system for randomly generating a planet and the surface maps of the planet working, that it was very easy to make 1000 planets. They probably could have even made 2000 planets if they'd wanted. And it wouldn't have been much more work because it's just using the systems that they've got to randomly generate it. But still, just because you can have 1000 planets in your game does not mean that you should have 1000 planets in your game. The scope should have been much tighter, and the game worlds and game planets should have been much more curated, and just put the exploration back in, because that's what so many people really enjoy about Bethesda games. If there's a Starfield 2, I really hope that somewhere out there a Bethesda employee just says to Todd Howard, wait a minute, 1000 planets was nuts. Let's go with maybe 6 to 10 very detailed and curated star systems, because that would be much better than 100 star systems with 1000 shitty generated planets in them. I do think that Bethesda will put work into making the game better. They've shown us with adding the new city maps and the promise of vehicles being added. I also watched a podcast recently of Matty Plays interviewing Todd Howard, and Todd Howard was saying that they are planning to support this game for as long as possible, so perhaps my proposed amount of support being at 2 years could be an understatement. Hopefully it is. I would like them to really support this game for as long as possible and add in so much stuff that feels like it's missing for the player, but I don't think that Bethesda's going to put in the work and get this game where it needs to be fun. I really hope I'm proven wrong in the future. Thanks for listening to my insane ramblings. Please leave a comment on what you think about the video, like and subscribe.